Edit, if you could ask for anything in the world, what would you choose? The billionaire CEO asked without the slightest hint that the answer waiting for her would change far more than a broken airplane. The private jet stood motionless beneath the bright Texas afternoon sun, its polished white fuselage reflecting waves of heat across the executive runway. Engineers circled the aircraft with tablets, laptops, and worried expressions, but every attempt ended with another quiet shake of the head. The departure had already been delayed for nearly 3 hours. Investors were waiting in Seattle, reporters were beginning to ask questions, and the frustration hanging in the air felt heavier than the humid summer sky itself. Claire Kensington, founder and CEO of Kensington Aerospace, removed her sunglasses and slowly looked at the silent crowd gathered near the aircraft. She had built one of America's fastest-growing aviation companies by refusing to accept impossible as an answer, yet today the impossible stood only a few feet away. She folded her arms and spoke with calm confidence that carried across the entire hangar. Whoever fixes my plane today can ask me for one wish. Money, a promotion, a scholarship, a donation. Anything within reason. Conversations immediately erupted. Some laughed nervously. Others rushed back toward the aircraft, hoping one more inspection might reveal the answer they had somehow missed. Standing near the edge of the maintenance bay, however, was a man no one bothered to notice. Ethan slowly removed his cap and placed it on a nearby toolbox before kneeling beside the open engine compartment. The other mechanics had already disconnected panels, scanned diagnostic systems, and replaced sensors that had shown no obvious faults. Expensive equipment surrounded the aircraft, yet Ethan reached instead for a small flashlight and a simple wrench that had been riding in the same weathered toolbox for years. He did not begin by touching the engine. He listened. His eyes moved from one component to another while the faint clicking sounds of cooling metal echoed through the hangar. Claire watched from several yards away, curious despite herself. Most technicians rushed to prove how much they knew. This man seemed determined to let the airplane speak first. One senior engineer folded his arms and whispered, "He is wasting his time." Another quietly nodded in agreement. Ethan ignored every word. He climbed the maintenance ladder with calm, steady movements, paused beside the left engine intake, and gently rested his fingertips against a narrow hydraulic access panel. His expression never changed, but something behind his eyes suddenly sharpened. He climbed back down and walked around the landing gear, following a line no one else had bothered to inspect twice. Lily continued reading on the bench, although every few moments she looked toward her father with complete confidence. She had seen that look on his face before. It was the same quiet expression he wore whenever he repaired an old family truck that everyone else believed belonged in a junkyard. Ethan finally spoke, his voice so calm that several people leaned closer simply to hear him. "May I see the maintenance records from the last cross-country inspection?" The chief engineer blinked with surprise. "Those files have nothing to do with today's fault." Ethan smiled politely. "Maybe, maybe not." Claire gave a small nod, and within seconds the digital records appeared on a tablet. Ethan studied only 3 pages before handing it back. "The problem started 2 inspections ago," he said softly. "Everyone has been chasing the warning message instead of the reason the warning appeared." Silence settled across the group. Ethan opened one narrow service panel beneath the fuselage and reached toward a wiring bundle tucked behind a hydraulic support bracket. He carefully loosened a protective sleeve before revealing a single worn connector hidden almost completely from view. It showed no dramatic damage, no smoke, no broken pieces. Only a faint pattern of vibration where that had slowly interrupted communication between 2 critical systems. "There," he said. The computer believed something much larger had failed because this tiny connection kept sending the wrong information. Several engineers stared in disbelief. One immediately compared Ethan's observation with the aircraft diagnostics, and his face slowly lost every trace of confidence. "He is right," the engineer whispered. "That sensor never actually failed." Ethan replaced the connector with a spare component from the maintenance inventory, secured the wiring harness, and tightened every fastener with deliberate precision. He never rushed. He never celebrated. When everything was complete, he stepped back from the aircraft and simply said, "You can start her now." Claire looked toward the flight crew. The captain climbed into the cockpit, pressed the ignition sequence, and within moments the engines awakened with a smooth, confident roar that rolled across the runway like distant thunder softened by summer air. The warning lights disappeared one after another until only clear green indicators remained across the flight display. Nobody cheered. Nobody moved. The entire hangar stood perfectly still, not because they had witnessed something impossible, but because they had just watched extraordinary skill arrive wrapped in complete humility. For several long seconds, the only sound inside the hangar came from the steady rhythm of the aircraft engines, smooth and confident, as though they had never refused to start at all. The tension that had filled the runway only minutes earlier dissolved into quiet disbelief. A few mechanics exchanged uncertain glances. Others lowered their tablets without saying a word. The chief engineer slowly removed his glasses, studying Ethan with an expression that carried more respect than pride. Claire Kensington walked toward the aircraft at an unhurried pace, her heels clicking softly across the polished concrete floor. She had spent years negotiating billion-dollar contracts, leading international meetings, and making decisions that affected thousands of employees. Yet she had learned one lesson that never failed her. Truly exceptional people rarely introduce themselves by talking. They introduce themselves by solving problems everyone else believed were impossible. Ethan was already wiping his hands with an old cotton shop towel, as though the entire moment had been nothing more than another ordinary afternoon. He carefully returned every borrowed tool to its proper place before closing his toolbox with a gentle click. Then he turned toward the wooden bench where Lily immediately jumped to her feet and ran into his arms with the effortless trust only a child could possess. "I knew you could fix it, Daddy," she said with a bright smile. Ethan laughed quietly and brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from her face. "You always believe in me more than I believe in myself." Lily looked up with complete certainty. "That is because you always fix things." Claire stopped a few feet away without interrupting them. Something about the simple exchange settled deeply within her. She had seen fathers buy expensive gifts, promise impossible vacations, and speak grand words in front of cameras. She had rarely seen a father whose daughter looked at him as though the entire world felt safe simply because he was nearby. One of Claire's executive assistants stepped closer and whispered that the investors were still waiting in Seattle and the revised departure window would close within 20 minutes. Claire acknowledged the reminder with a slight nod, but kept her attention on Ethan. "Mr. Walker," she said warmly, "I believe I made a promise." Ethan looked up politely. "You did. Anything within reason," Claire continued. "Money, a new position, a house, a scholarship for your daughter. Whatever you ask, I will honor my word." Several employees quietly gathered nearby, pretending to organize equipment while secretly hoping to hear his answer. Some expected him to ask for $1 million. Others imagined he would request a senior engineering position inside the company. Even the mechanics who had doubted him earlier now watched with genuine curiosity. Ethan glanced at Lily, who had quietly resumed holding his hand with both of hers. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the wide hangar doors, wrapping father and daughter in a warm golden glow that softened every hard edge around them. He took a slow breath, not because he was uncertain, but because some wishes deserved to be spoken carefully. Claire noticed that his eyes never drifted toward the private jet, the executives, or the wealth surrounding them. They remained fixed on the little girl standing beside him. In that silent moment, she realized something extraordinary. Whatever Ethan Walker was about to ask for, it would not be for himself. The breeze drifting through the open hangar carried the familiar scent of jet fuel, warm concrete, and distant rain as every eye remained fixed on Ethan Walker. He lowered his gaze to Lily for just a moment before looking back at Claire Kensington with the same quiet composure he had shown from the moment he first approached the disabled aircraft. There was no excitement in his expression, no trace of greed, only the calm honesty of a man who had spent years placing someone else's happiness ahead of his own. Claire offered him an encouraging smile. "Go ahead," she said gently. "Whatever your wish is, I will do everything I can." Ethan nodded once. "I believe you." The words came so naturally that even Claire felt the weight behind them. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he squeezed Lily's little hand, as though drawing strength from the person who mattered most. Around them the executives, mechanics, pilots, and ground crew stood in complete silence. A camera crew preparing to document the repaired flight quietly lowered their equipment, sensing that something more important than business was unfolding. Ethan finally spoke. "I do not need more money." Several people exchanged surprised glances. He continued, "I do not need a better job. I have enough to keep food on our table, and I enjoy honest work." Claire listened without interrupting. "I do not need a larger house. Lily already fills the one we have with everything that matters." His voice remained steady, but the softness in his eyes deepened when he looked at his daughter again. "There is only one thing I have never been able to repair." Lily looked up at him with quiet curiosity, unaware of what he was about to say. Ethan smiled gently before meeting Claire's eyes once more. "My daughter needs a mother." The words settled over the hangar with a stillness so complete that even the humming aircraft seemed farther away. Nobody expected laughter. Nobody offered applause. They simply stood there, absorbing a wish unlike anything they had imagined. Claire felt her heartbeat slow. During her career, she had heard requests for private islands, company shares, executive offices, luxury cars, and charitable endowments. Never once had someone answered an extraordinary opportunity with such a deeply personal hope. Ethan quickly added, "I am not asking you to become that person." His respectful tone removed every possibility of misunderstanding. "I know a family cannot be built from a promise made beside an airplane. I only wanted to answer honestly because you asked what I truly wished for." Every night before Lily goes to sleep, she prays that one day someone kind will read her bedtime stories, cheer at her school concerts, and remind her that she is beautiful the way her mother used to. "I can be her father. I cannot become her mother." Claire looked toward Lily, who quietly lowered her eyes before offering a shy smile that carried both hope and remarkable maturity for an 8-year-old child. Something inside Claire softened in a way she had not experienced for many years. Board meetings had taught her how to calculate risk. Success had taught her how to protect her heart. Yet no business lesson had prepared her for the quiet dignity of a father whose greatest dream was never for himself, but for the little girl standing faithfully at his side. Claire did not answer immediately. She had negotiated with presidents, persuaded skeptical investors, and stood before thousands of shareholders without losing her composure. Yet the simple honesty in Ethan's words had left her searching for something she rarely needed in business: the right response. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the hangar floor, casting long golden reflections beneath the wings of the waiting aircraft. Somewhere beyond the runway, another jet lifted gracefully into the blue sky, its engines fading into the distance like a quiet reminder that every journey began with a single decision. Claire finally stepped closer, her voice softer than anyone in the company had ever heard. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Ethan offered a polite smile. "It was the only answer I had." Claire looked toward Lily, who stood patiently beside her father, gently holding the corner of his work shirt as though it were the safest place in the world. "How old are you?" Claire asked. "I am 8. Lily replied with perfect manners. "Daddy says I will be 9 before the leaves turn orange again." Claire smiled. "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" Lily looked at her father before answering. "Someone who fixes broken hearts." "Daddy already fixes airplanes and cars. I think hearts are harder." A few people nearby quietly lowered their eyes. Even the senior executives who had spent the morning discussing profits and expansion suddenly found themselves listening to a little girl who spoke with remarkable sincerity. Claire felt an unfamiliar warmth settle inside her chest. She knelt until she was at Lily's eye level. "Your father must be very proud of you." Lily nodded confidently. "I am the lucky one." Ethan looked away for a brief moment, blinking against unexpected emotion before clearing his throat with a gentle smile. Claire rose slowly and turned toward her executive assistant. "Reschedule every meeting after today's flight. I will handle the Seattle presentation tomorrow." The assistant hesitated. "The board may not approve another delay." Claire answered without raising her voice. "Then they can begin without me if necessary." Her attention returned to Ethan. "Would you and Lily have dinner with me this evening?" Ethan looked surprised. "Dinner? Nothing formal," Claire explained. "There is a small family restaurant near the river outside the airport. I would simply like to know the man who solved a problem my entire engineering division could not solve." Ethan hesitated for only a moment. "I do not usually accept invitations from chief executive officers." Claire laughed softly, the sound light enough to dissolve the remaining tension in the hangar. Then perhaps accept one from Claire instead. Ethan looked toward Lily. What do you think? Lily's eyes brightened. Can they make grilled cheese sandwiches? Claire smiled wider than she had in weeks. I happen to know they make the best grilled cheese in the county. Lily looked back at her father with hopeful eyes. Ethan chuckled quietly before giving a small nod. Then we would be honored. Claire extended her hand, not as a chief executive rewarding an employee, but as one person inviting another into an unexpected conversation. Ethan shook it with the same quiet humility that had impressed her from the beginning. Neither of them realized that the repaired airplane had merely brought their paths together. The real journey, the one neither success nor skill could have predicted, was only beginning. The evening sky glowed with soft shades of amber and deep blue as the three of them walked into the little family restaurant overlooking the quiet river. It was the kind of place where the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air, country music played gently from an old speaker above the counter, and the waitress greeted nearly every customer by name. Claire realized she had not stepped into a place like this in years. Most of her dinners happened inside luxury hotels or private dining rooms where every conversation revolved around numbers, acquisitions, and market forecasts. Here, children laughed over milkshakes, grandparents shared homemade pie, and nobody seemed impressed by expensive watches or tailored business suits. Ethan pulled out a chair for Lily before taking his own seat across from Claire. Thank you for coming, Claire said. Ethan smiled politely. Thank you for inviting us somewhere that feels like home instead of somewhere that feels expensive. Claire laughed quietly. I suppose I needed somewhere that reminded me what normal feels like. The waitress arrived carrying 3 glasses of iced tea and handed Lily a small coloring page with a box of crayons. You must be the artist tonight, she said warmly. Lily grinned. I like drawing airplanes. Ethan smiled. And hearts. Lily nodded proudly. Because airplanes carry people, but hearts carry families. Claire listened without speaking. Every sentence the little girl shared somehow reflected the gentle values her father had quietly planted inside her. After their meals arrived, conversation drifted naturally from airplanes to school, favorite books, county fairs, and the changing seasons. There was no pressure to impress anyone. Ethan answered every question honestly, but never spoke about himself unless Claire asked directly. Finally, she leaned forward with genuine curiosity. You understand aircraft systems better than many engineers I have hired. How did you learn all of that? Ethan rested his fork beside his plate before answering. I studied aerospace engineering years ago. After graduation, I joined a flight testing program. I loved every minute of it. Claire looked surprised. Then why leave? Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was happily coloring a picture of an airplane flying above a farmhouse. His smile remained warm, although a quiet sadness touched his eyes. My wife became sick. Eventually, every promotion, every opportunity, every career dream stopped matching. The only place I wanted to be was beside her. Claire lowered her eyes respectfully. Ethan continued without bitterness. After she passed away, Lily needed stability more than I needed ambition. I chose smaller airports because they let me be home every afternoon when school ended. Claire slowly shook her head. You gave up an extraordinary career. Ethan answered with peaceful certainty. No, I traded one dream for another. Silence settled comfortably around the table. Outside the restaurant windows, the last rays of sunlight shimmered across the river while fireflies began appearing above the tall grass near the water. Claire realized she had spent years surrounding herself with people who chased bigger titles and larger fortunes, yet the man sitting across from her had quietly measured success by whether his daughter ever had to wonder if her father would come home. For the first time in many years, Claire felt that the most remarkable person she had met was not someone standing on a stage accepting awards, but a humble father whose greatest achievement could never be displayed inside a trophy case. The following Monday began with clear skies and the steady rhythm of airplanes lifting into the morning light, but inside Kensington Aerospace headquarters the atmosphere felt very different. Glass walls reflected polished conference tables, digital displays streamed. Financial reports across enormous screens, and the board of directors had already gathered before Claire arrived. The moment she stepped into the room, conversation stopped. Some executives offered polite smiles while others exchanged uneasy glances. News traveled quickly inside successful companies, and word had already spread that the chief executive officer had canceled an important presentation, shared dinner with an airport mechanic, and personally delayed her schedule for someone no one in the corporate office had ever heard of the week before. Claire placed her portfolio on the table and greeted everyone with her usual calm confidence. But before she could begin the meeting, one board member cleared his throat. "Claire, we need to discuss something before quarterly projections." She nodded. "Go ahead." The older executive folded his hands. "Several investors noticed you postponed the Seattle meeting. They are asking whether your priorities have changed." Claire answered evenly. "They have not." Another director leaned forward. "There are also questions about the mechanic who repaired your aircraft." Claire remained composed. "His name is Ethan Walker." The room grew quiet. Regardless of his name, another executive continued carefully. "People are beginning to speculate about your relationship with him. Rumors spread faster than financial reports. We simply want to protect the company's reputation." Claire looked around the room before speaking. "Our reputation should be built on integrity, not gossip." Nobody answered immediately. The meeting continued, but the conversation never fully returned to business. Later that afternoon, Claire found herself thinking less about profit margins and more about a little girl coloring airplanes with crayons, while her father quietly placed her happiness above every career opportunity he had ever received. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan finished another routine inspection inside the maintenance hangar before collecting Lily from school. As they walked toward his pickup truck, Lily happily talked about a science project involving weather balloons and paper airplanes. Ethan listened with genuine interest, smiling at every excited detail. When they reached home, he noticed several unfamiliar vehicles parked across the street. A local reporter approached politely and asked whether he had become the personal mechanic for Kensington Aerospace. Ethan smiled kindly but declined the interview. He had never wanted attention. He only wanted peace. That evening, he sat alone on the front porch after Lily had fallen asleep, watching the porch light attract tiny moths while warm summer air drifted through the neighborhood. He knew exactly how stories like this usually unfolded. Successful people lived beneath constant public attention. Ordinary people often became headlines without ever asking for it. The last thing he wanted was for Lily to grow up surrounded by whispers or speculation because of him. The next morning, he made a quiet decision. He wrote a brief letter thanking Claire for her generosity, explaining that although he would always respect her friendship, it would be better if their paths remained separate. Sometimes, he believed, protecting someone else's peace required walking away before feelings had the chance to become complications. He folded the letter carefully, placed it inside a plain envelope, and carried it with him to work, unaware that the hardest repair of his life would not involve an airplane at all, but two hearts that had only just begun to find one another. The envelope remained inside Ethan's toolbox all morning, untouched yet impossible to ignore. Every time he reached for a wrench or a flashlight, he caught another glimpse of the plain white paper and reminded himself why he had written it. Claire deserved a peaceful life free from rumors, and Lily deserved a childhood untouched by public attention. It was the responsible choice, even if responsibility had never felt so heavy. Shortly after noon, his phone rang. The school nurse spoke gently. "Mr. Walker, Lily is all right, but she developed a high fever during class. We would like someone to pick her up as soon as possible." Ethan thanked her and drove across town immediately. By the time he arrived, Lily sat quietly in the nurse's office wrapped in a light blanket, her cheeks slightly flushed and her usual bright smile replaced by tired eyes. She still managed a small grin when she saw him. "I am sorry, Daddy. I wanted to finish my science project." Ethan knelt beside her and brushed a hand across her forehead. "Nothing matters more than getting you home." The family doctor examined Lily later that afternoon and reassured Ethan that she was dealing with a common seasonal virus. Rest, fluids, and time would help her recover. Even so, Ethan stayed beside her bed through the evening, reading stories exactly the way he had every night since she was old enough to understand them. Outside, gentle rain tapped softly against the windows while the little house settled into quiet stillness. Just before sunset, a knock came at the front door. Ethan opened it with surprise. Claire stood on the porch holding a small paper bag from the same family restaurant where they had shared dinner, and another bag filled with soup, fresh bread, children's books, and a small plush teddy bear. "I stopped by the airport," she said softly. They told me Lily went home sick. Ethan looked genuinely touched. You did not have to come. Claire smiled warmly. I know. I wanted to. Lily called weakly from the bedroom. Daddy, who is it? Claire hesitated, unsure whether she should step inside. Ethan opened the door a little wider. Come in. The house was modest but welcoming, filled with framed family photographs, handmade drawings taped to the refrigerator, and shelves crowded with well-loved books instead of expensive decorations. Claire placed the soup in the kitchen before quietly walking toward Lily's room. The little girl brightened immediately. You remembered me. Claire sat beside the bed with a gentle smile. Of course I did. She opened one of the storybooks she had brought. Would you like me to read while your father warms the soup? Lily nodded eagerly. As Claire began reading, her voice filled the room with calm warmth that blended naturally with the sound of rain outside. Ethan stood silently in the hallway for a moment, listening. The picture before him felt strangely familiar, as though a missing piece of their home had quietly found its place without asking permission. When the story ended, Lily looked up at Claire with sleepy eyes filled with trust. She reached out, gently took Claire's hand, and whispered the single word she had carried in her heart for years. Mom. Claire's eyes filled with tears before she could answer, and Ethan understood that some prayers arrived so quietly, they sounded almost exactly like hope. 1 year later, the same private runway shimmered beneath the golden light of an early autumn morning. But this time nobody stood there because of a broken airplane. Employees gathered quietly near the polished jet while friends, neighbors, mechanics, pilots, and a handful of executives smiled with the relaxed warmth that only genuine celebration could bring. There were no television cameras, no reporters waiting behind barricades, and no grand publicity campaign. Claire had insisted that some moments belonged to the people living them rather than the world watching them. Ethan adjusted the collar of his navy suit before looking toward Lily, who carefully held a small bouquet of white wildflowers she had picked herself the evening before. She was smiling so brightly that it seemed impossible to remember the lonely little girl who had once prayed every night for someone to read bedtime stories beside her father. Claire walked across the runway wearing a simple ivory dress that reflected the morning sunlight with quiet elegance. She was still the leader of one of the nation's most respected aerospace companies, but success no longer felt like the center of her identity. Somewhere along the journey, she had discovered that building airplanes could connect cities, yet building a family could transform a life. Ethan met her halfway, and neither of them rushed. Some promises deserved to be reached one peaceful step at a time. The ceremony lasted only a few minutes beneath the open American sky. Their closest friends smiled through grateful tears while the breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and aviation fuel across the field where their story had quietly begun. When the vows were finished, Lily stepped between them exactly where she had always belonged. She slipped one hand into Ethan's and the other into Claire's before looking up with joyful certainty. Now we can all go home together, she whispered. No one spoke for several seconds. Even the seasoned mechanics who rarely showed emotion quietly wiped their eyes. After the ceremony, the captain invited the new family aboard the very aircraft Ethan had repaired on the afternoon that had changed everything. As the engines started with their familiar smooth confidence, Ethan rested his hand gently against the cabin wall and smiled. Claire noticed the gesture. Still checking your work? She asked playfully. Ethan laughed softly. No, just remembering. The airplane lifted gracefully into the bright blue sky, climbing above fields, rivers, and quiet neighborhoods that grew smaller beneath the wings. Lily sat between them, looking out the window with complete wonder before reaching for both of their hands. She no longer needed to imagine what a family could feel like, because she was living inside the answer every single day. Ethan looked toward Claire with quiet gratitude. Do you remember the wish you promised me? Claire nodded gently. I do. Ethan smiled. You gave me something far greater than either of us understood that day. Claire rested her head lightly against his shoulder as sunlight filled the cabin. Sometimes the greatest miracles never arrive with applause or headlines. Sometimes they begin with a humble act of kindness, a truthful answer, and two people willing to believe that dignity, grace, and second chances are stronger than fear. And somewhere far below, another father hurried home after work. Another little girl waited by a window, and another ordinary day quietly prepared to become someone else's miracle.